Welcome to the GCN Tech Clinic, where we aim to answer the questions you've submitted using the hashtag AskGCNTech, and we hopefully get through a good few today and straight to it. First up, we have got, is straightening a bent derailleur hanger, is there a risk of damaging a carbon frame? Well, there is always a slight risk of damaging a carbon frame, but my first bit of advice is to always avoid trying to straighten a bent mech hanger because, well, they get significantly weakened and you do run the risk of it breaking then when you're out on a ride. The best advice is to always carry a spare one with you for your frame. But if you are going to straighten that mech hanger out, it's important to make sure you leave the wheel secured into the frame, and that will avoid putting unnecessary stress through the small bolts that attach it to the frame, because that's the point where you could risk damaging the frame. So keep it secure and then you shouldn't run into any trouble. Next up, we've got David Hewson, who's asked, where can he buy the same touch-up paint that was used on his bike? And that's a good question because, well, some brands will list that on their website and you can buy that relative to the colour of your bike, and they'll also list the paint codes that the bike is painted in. So if you can't buy it from the company directly, you can go to specialist paint shops that will make up the colour of paint that you need, and you can buy a little pot from it there. Also, many car body shops will be able to make up the paint that you need, even if you don't know the code. Take the bike there and they'll be able to match that up. Next up, we've got Kadar Kolkani with their question, which, as I read it, I think is a bit of a funny one, but we'll see in a second. And they say, if they're running a 6-watt LED headlight, are they losing 6 watts of power? And if they run a 6-watt or higher power rear light, can they gain that power back? They say they used to have such questions in their physics classes. Well, yeah, well, I think it is a bit of a fun one because, well, if you've got a headlight on the bike, it's not going to slow you down. And equally, if you have a really bright tail light, it's not going to speed you up, even though the wattage of the light is written on the light. It's not going to slow you down. Although, it does lead me to the question of, Ollie does always have a rear light on his bike. So maybe he knows something I don't, and he's gaining that extra power from it. But unfortunately, for most of us, I don't think it's going to make any difference whatsoever. Next in, we've got Jai Hano, who asks, hi, do I have to disconnect my disc brake hoses whilst changing the handlebar? And do I need to bleed the brakes? Also, they ask, do they need to replace the olives on the brake hoses? A few different questions in there, but if you are going to break the hydraulic system open, you don't always have to bleed the system, because providing you don't pull the brake lever or lose any fluid, you can put it back together and sometimes get away without needing to bleed the system, which is good. Unfortunately though, if you do pull the brake lever or lose any fluid out of the system, then yeah, you are going to have to bleed it and get rid of all the air that's in there, because otherwise your brakes just won't work very well. And I've done it quite a few times actually, where you can open the system up or even change the hoses round left and right if you want to change the front and rear brakes around, and you can get away with it, but you're going to have to be a little bit mindful of it just to make sure your brakes are working okay. Next up, we've got Will Richardson, who asks, they recently bought a Wahoo kicker for the winter and have noticed that they're actually feeling really uncomfortable on the saddle with a bit of numbness when they're using it. And they say this doesn't happen when they're out on the road, but he's wondering if there's any reasons for this, because out on the road, all of the parts are the same, just when he's indoors, but he's not very comfortable. And this is actually a common problem that lots of people find when they're riding indoors on the static trainer. It's because, well, you're in a static position, so you're not moving about on the bike anything like as much as you are when you're out on the road, and therefore you quite often don't even get out of the saddle for prolonged periods of time, and that's why you're sort of getting uncomfortable and a bit of numbness on the bike, which, well, it's just not great for anybody, is it? So it's important when you're riding indoors, try and be a little bit mindful of now and again to get out of the saddle and relieve a bit of pressure and move around, and it'll help your shoulders and your back too. And on to our next question. We've got Crikey, is what their name is. Well, interesting. Recently, their chain fell off as they were cycling and they had a bit of a hard time putting it back on. Can we give some advice and tips on how to put the chain back on fast and efficiently? Yeah, well, when your chain falls off, it is pretty rubbish, isn't it? No one enjoys that. And it's worth checking your front mech limit screws as well, because they might be the reason behind that. But sometimes your chain does just fall off for no apparent reason, and it is very annoying. And if your chain has fallen off on the inside of the chain set in towards the frame, it's important to stop pedaling straight away. Otherwise, you do run the risk of damaging your frame when the chain gets pulled all the way around and could at least damage the paint as well as the actual frame itself. But if the chain has fallen off on the inside, one little trick that you can sometimes get away with is shifting the front derailleur into the big chainring and very carefully pedaling, because sometimes the chain will hook itself back onto the chainrings and you could get away with that. But if that's not going to work for you, the tried and tested method of doing this is to take the tension off of the chain with the rear derailleur cage, so push that all the way around, and then using your other hand, carefully guide the chain back onto the chainrings. But your chances are you're going to get pretty grubby and greasy fingers, so it is worth trying to keep some nitrile gloves in your saddlebag, or using a stick, or if you want to go all out, maybe use some leaves nearby, because that'll help you keep your hands nice and clean. And on to our final question this week, and it comes in from Savas Annabel, so thanks very much. And they're asking, they've changed their crank arm length from 172.5mm to 165mm, and do they need to lift their saddle? And if yes, by how much? Well, and that's a good question, because obviously changing your crank length is going to have an impact on your position on the bike. And you are going to have to put your saddle up. Because the cranks have got shorter, you're going to have to account for that. Now, the difference in crank length that you've got is 7.5mm, but you're not going to have to adjust the cranks quite that much. I'd suggest maybe a change of about 5mm and then try that out. And then if you need to change it afterwards, you can make some minor adjustments up or down as you feel necessary. One thing it is important to note of is when you're changing the saddle height, it will have an impact on the setback of your saddle, because obviously the seat tube is at a slight angle. As you put the saddle up, it's going to shift the saddle back slightly, so it's worth checking that as well. And that rounds off another GCN Tech Clinic this week, and thanks very much for all your questions. Please do keep them coming down in the comments section below using the hashtag AskGCNTech. Thanks very much. See you later.